It will take nothing short of 100 proof living to restore lives. Join a conversation between a cop and a criminal with Brian Yates and Chris Pridmore, working to inspire and motivate others, rebuilding the communication breakdown. This is the 100 Proof Living Podcast.
Welcome back to Conversations with a Cop and a Criminal. I'm Brian Yates.
And I'm Chris Pridmore, and welcome to the show. We have a great guest here this morning, Canandaigua Chief of Police, Stephen Hedworth. Spent 16 years as a veteran in law enforcement on the Canandaigua Police Department, has gone up through the ranks, and in 2016 became Chief of Police. And we just love to welcome you to the show.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. One of the intriguing things about this, and the shtick here, is that we're a cop and a criminal.
Yep.
You were the chief of police at the beginning of my fall into criminal activity. So you were the head of the police department. Not all the rest and things that I had were in your jurisdiction, but I've always known you to be a fair man, having been on the other side. And what we thought was interesting is, being gracious enough to come here to even have the conversation. And you kind of are the embodiment of the point. Once we get our stuff together, we're all just people just trying to work on this situation in life. And so this episode, really what we were hoping to do is focusing on your viewpoint, some of your experiences and what you see as some of the challenges for law enforcement today.
Absolutely.
Chief, can you speak a little bit to... So your heart is coming out in this, just as we had Sheriff Baxter on before, and as I've spoken to quite a bit in the law enforcement community. Your heart is becoming evident because you have opportunities to speak, and you have an opportunity to come on this show and speak at groups, whether it's speaking into the addiction community or the homeless community or other areas of disadvantage where you're trying to help, and so then your heart becomes obvious, but. I think in reality, the majority of law enforcement, that's where their heart is, but that's not evident to people. And I realize there's social media and, some negative outlets there, but how do you approach, and how would you want your officers to kind of approach this stigma barrier that's actually against law enforcement?
I think a lot of that goes back to, for me personally, it's easy for me because I think if you're just who you are in life, it's much easier. Not trying to be something you're not. So, when I got started in this career, I got kind of started late in life. I was 28 years old. I had a loving family, 3 siblings, 3 brothers, very close. I have, 4 children of my own. And I probably had a lot of opportunities in life that a lot of people didn't, And so when I got into the career as a young officer, you're kind of in that academy and you really don't know what you're getting yourself into. You go in there and you see all these shows and you think it's going to be one thing, and then you get into it and it's really something different. And for me, I always felt like, my strongest suits were just being able to relate to people and on a human level. And I think, that kind of gets lost. And I think every police officer out there, that's in them. It's just maybe they're a little bit more reluctant to bring it out, or there's that stigma that you have to be a certain way, that, the toughness and the emotional toughness. And I think once you open yourself up to people and they see that you're connecting with them on a human level, it makes our job much, much easier. My mindset's always been, listen, police work for me, I don't like to call myself a police officer. I like to call myself a problem solver. And the only thing that separates me from anybody else is that, every day we all struggle. I struggle with things. Everybody in life struggles. The only difference is, I throw on a bulletproof vest and a uniform every day, and I go out and help people solve their problems. And at the end of the day, I take that uniform and bulletproof vest off, and I go home and I try to work through my own problems. So I think for me, I'm in my 19th year. I'm actually coming up. I'll be eligible for retirement here in February. It's been a great 20 years, but I don't plan on going anywhere. But for me, it all comes down to the simple thing. It's about the people you hire and the people that you promote. To be out there as representatives of the police department. And if you look at yourself more as a problem solver than as a police officer, I think it for me, that's how I think that my heart shines through in that aspect. And that's what I look for in the people that I hire and I promote.
You were talking about... sorry.
Go ahead, Chris.
No, I was just going to say, you're talking about being a problem solver and some of those challenges, and I hear this from nursing staff at the hospital as well. You are there and you're trying to serve the community, but when you take that vest off, you still have to have the energy to deal with your own. How do you do that? Because it does seem to be a challenge across law enforcement now, where that exhaustion level, you've got your own stuff now. Now you got to live your life. Yeah. How do you approach that?
It's tough. You got to have a support system, and whatever that system is, whether it's a church, family, friends, whatever outlet you have, that you have to have it. I'm blessed. I have my girlfriend Cassandra. She's a driving force in my life, and she's a nurse at Thompson Hospital.
Okay.
And for me to come home and to have somebody there that kind of understands those challenges, and she can kind of level me out. And I think it's important for everybody to have somebody, some type of support structure, and whatever that may be. It can look a lot of different ways. I go home at the end of the day, and my daughter's still at home with us. She's a little one, so it kind of rejuvenates me, and it kind of reminds me that we all came into this world with a blank slate, and as parents, we try our best not to mess that up. And it goes back to I had a loving family, loving support system, so that's kind of the stuff that I fall back on.
Right.
Well, and I wanted to point out too that I think, like you said, when you go through the academy, your delusions get straightened out right away. Especially once you hit the street and probably go through an FTO program, you start to realize what the job really entails. But I do think over time, in any job, there's burnout, right? And I think Chris even alluded to kind of emotional exhaustion. And so I think another challenge for law enforcement is, how do you approach every call like it's your first, whether it's the first in your career or the first for that day? Because you could, you might, at the end of the shift, you might have gone to 4 disturbances, and one of them, might have ended up very badly. You go to the next disturbance, and you've got to somehow deprogram yourself from that last call and go in fair-minded, open-minded, and still using those kind of same barometer for how you're making decisions. So, is there training? What is it that you try to keep a fresh mindset for officers so that they can decompress and so that they are trying to be fair and impartial every single time they go out?
Yeah, I think a lot of that comes back to, you have to, you have to know the people that work for you, and sometimes you have to protect them from themselves. So, you have to kind of understand that, they're coming to work every day, and that you don't know what they dealt with 10 minutes before they got to work. So you're not always, like every profession, you're not always going to catch everybody at their best moment. An officer may come in one day and not have any issues and go through the day, and everything goes great. The calls for service are handled the way you would want them handled. But, maybe there's a struggle at home. Maybe there's a problem with the kids or in the marriage or whatever it may be. So for me, in an department of my size, when you're talking about 27 sworn officers, it's very easy to keep a thumb on that, have starting the force with a lot of the more senior officers, but then also, making sure, you're checking in at the roll calls, and you're talking to the supervisors, and you're looking for changes in performance or attitude, or, you have to stay on top of that stuff. Because I think a lot of times, we become the forgotten ones. That people forget. Like I said, we're throwing on a uniform and a bulletproof vest, but we're no different than the people that we're serving. We have all those same challenges. So for me, it's just trying to stay in tune with what's going on with the the supervisors that are out there day in and day out, and seeing the red flags. And when when the red flags do pop up, you got to be ready to take action. You got to be able to reach out and say, hey, what can we do to help you here? For us to be successful, for me, I look at myself, I'm operating, a business. We operate the same way. For us to be successful, the people that work within that business have to come to work every day, prepared to work. And it can be very, in law enforcement, it can be very difficult to do that day in and day out if you don't have the right support both at home and in the workplace.
I'm curious, I appreciate that approach. You said you used business, and I've had about 11 years with Johnson & Johnson, and they have this thing called the Credo, and their whole point was, you take care of the employee takes care of the patient, the financials take care of themselves.
Absolutely.
And it sounds to me like that same model that you're following, and I appreciate that very much. I'm curious stylistically, though, when you took over, who you took over for, I didn't realize that he was chief of police. I just was rolling around on a mat with this man. The previous chief of police, and I trained a little bit with jiu-jitsu with him. The only thing I knew is he's a little gruff and he had a back problem, but he was definitely a different personality than you. I'm curious, how did that transition work for you? Because we do have such a unique culture within Canada when it's a lot of home-based crimes.
Absolutely. For me, so I did my entire career with the city of Canandaigua, and like I said, I got started later in life. So when I walked in, it was then Chief McCarthy. He had done 20-plus years in NYPD, retired, came up to Canandaigua, did 20-plus years. So, I was one of the, my path to law enforcement wasn't a direct path. It wasn't kind of always where I saw myself, but it's where I ended up. But I remember the day I sat in his office and I interviewed, and, I didn't really know much about anything. And he looked at me, and, Chief McCarthy said, hey, we're going to give you an opportunity. We're going to offer you a job. And you'll probably be like a lot of these young cops who want to go up to the bigger cities with all the money and all the action. And I looked at him and I said, no. Well, I said, you give me an opportunity here, and I appreciate that. So in return, I'll give you that same opportunity. So, and I'll stay here, and that's what I did. And, I kind of had the opportunity to work in all different assets of the department, spent the 16 years mostly in the road patrol. And then when Chief Welch took over in 2008, I had the luxury of working with him at the road level as officers and then under his supervision. So it wasn't a hard transition, but both of those gentlemen were embedded in the Canandaigua community.
Right.
So, the transition wasn't hard. And actually, I've relied on both of them. I met with both of them and talked to them in depth about different things and challenges. And so I had the luxury of falling back on that. Mm-hmm. And particularly with Chief Welch, a gentleman that was born and raised in that community, you can't go anywhere without knowing or seeing something about Chief John Welch. So
right.
It's a great resource. I think in my line of work, you can't be afraid to reach out and for help, and wherever that may be, in direction and advice. So I try, whether it's I try to stay in my lane, and if I don't know, I don't have the answer, I try to find somebody that does. So it's been a great resource, and it's kind of reflective of the Canandaigua community. It's very tight knit community, and it's a great place to work and live.
Chief, what would you say are maybe the couple of top 2 or 3 challenges for your department right now?
I would say it's reflective of everything nationwide. Obviously, recruitment is a huge topic right now, and some of the literature out there, and if you watch all the news, the biggest agencies out there are struggling to find recruitment, and it makes it even more difficult for the smaller agencies. So, and I think there's a lot that goes into that. I mean, it's not a type of job where you're working nights, weekends, holidays, maybe not under the best conditions. I think a lot of the unwarranted media attention that we attract, I don't think it's necessarily fair all the time. So I think people have a certain, or cast us in a certain light, which is not necessarily true. So I think recruitment's huge. The mental health and the substance abuse part of it is enormous. It's changed the face of law enforcement, changed how we approach just the day-to-day activities in law enforcement. It is probably one of the most sweeping changes across this country, and we're all still trying to get a handle on it. And as ironic as that sounds to me, because it's been something that's been going on for years and years and years in this country, and we still haven't got our minds around it. So I think there's just the challenges that just seem to come year after year, but the consistent one in my mind is the mental health, the substance abuse, and I see recruitment in the long term being a big challenge for us.
Sure. Well, just having the skill set to deal with mental health issues and substance abuse. I mean, you're asking a 20-something-year-old kid to go to a disturbance call and in seconds decide what is really going on there in that disturbance and make those kind of critical decisions. So I think that is tough. And I agree. Having spent a lot of my career in law enforcement, I do think that the social media, the media at large has been really unfair, at least as of late, within the last 10 years or so. We have some systemic problems that go back to, and the research has shown that a lot of the unfairness is socioeconomic, and there is a group of people that lived an entire generation of being probably poorly treated, not just by police officers. Police officers are an extension of I'm doing air quotes that you can't see, but the system. A lot of cultural things and even our political setup probably did disadvantage it did disadvantage people for a long time, but a lot of that has been corrected. However, it's not being felt at all levels, and so I feel like when you see, and recently Chris and I talked offline about yet another situation that came up where there are protests about an officer's response in a situation until the videos come out. Mm-hmm. And mm-hmm. it's this mob mentality of pile on. And I do think it makes it difficult, especially for the seasoned officers that have grown through transitions of their own. We've faced the community with a certain disposition years ago. And I love the language you're using. It's not just the people that you hire, it's the people that you promote. Mm-hmm. it's not just finding the guy that has the tenure, it's finding the guy that's going to be a leader.
Absolutely.
And being able to challenge his subordinates appropriately to draw the best out of them. And back to that bottom line of we're here to help people. And so I've seen that big paradigm shift in my career of the challenges that are in the community, but then specifically how law enforcement has to respond to that. So I appreciate your leadership in the Canandaigua community, just because I know how difficult it is. Because at night you go home not just bearing your own burdens, but feeling the weight of the department on your shoulders, and even more so the communities right on top of that. And so it's a heavy burden to carry.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to follow up to that, I mean, like any profession, there's people that shouldn't be police officers, and we all acknowledge that, we accept that, and we have to embrace that. And a lot of the mistreatment and that's happened in the past, and it continues to happen. I mean, we can't live in a bubble and say, hey, this doesn't exist, because it does. And when we all went to the academy, we all went into the academy with one thing in common: we all had a name, and we came out with that name. And what you've done over your career not only is a reflection of yourself, but everybody else. So I'm sure there's when a cop in Iowa is arrested for doing something wrong or misconduct or excessive force, that reflects on me. And I've never met that cop in Iowa. I mean, but people have to have that mindset. The things I do in Canandaigua, New York, or the things that my officers do in Canandaigua, New York, have a far greater outreach and impact than Canandaigua, New York. So in the law enforcement community, I mean, we have to own our past. We have to own the good and the bad. So and that's kind of how I look at it. I mean, again, everybody deserves and entitled to fair, equal, and equitable treatment under the law, and that's how it should be. And I think if we're not uncomfortable talking about that, which a lot of people are, we're not going to solve any problems. So open and candid conversation like the ones we're having here today, I think, are vital to moving that forward.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of speak in on there too, because you just hit the word that's my word: ownership. Mm-hmm. Reasonably, if I don't own my past, I mean, 2 of the arrests that your officers made with me were on Bristol Street. Very respectful the way they handled things, and it was fine. But what I did was illegal and caused me to have these issues. Now, we're expecting law enforcement to own it, but me with a criminal past and some mental health issues and alcohol addiction, I have to own that as well. It's not going to be the onus is not on law enforcement to own your role and then to just allow me to do whatever I want until eventually I come around. Mm-hmm. On the other side of the fence, and the rest of the community, regardless of our function, right now we're just representing, breaking the law versus the law. But there's also other elements in the community, even right down the interpersonal relationships we have in our home. We're always blaming somebody else, or socially we're blaming another party, political party. It really comes down to that ownership. Yep. Do I accept the fact that my situation was caused in large part because of me? Yeah, I do. And the going forward plan, how do I make that not happen again? Yeah. And so that's, I think that what some of the things you led to, but it does speak to your leadership. And I'm curious about one thing with that, because while you and I have a friendly interaction, and I appreciate that very much, that grace that you've offered to me personally, because this is my home. Mm-hmm. And I do love Canandaigua, and I'm doing everything I possibly can to help on the other side with people that are struggling with addiction. But leadership is important. And I'm curious, when you say you're leading others and you're hiring good leaders, what do you see as a leader?
Well, I think you have to, for me, there's certain things that when I look at somebody, to make a good police officer, there's a lot of things. We could teach you a lot of the skills that you're going to need. But for me, when I go to, as a member of the Finger Lakes Law Enforcement Academy, we have direct responsibility over the supervision of that academy and how we're going to instruct these cadets. And things when I go in there and when I talk, I said, to me, if you're a good police officer, you have to be humble. You have to have empathy. Those 2 things right there, you have to have those. And they're free. We don't, that cost you nothing. So if you have that understanding going in, that you're humble, that the people that you're dealing with are the same as you. And if you understand that and you accept that, and the empathy, you have to understand that, again, it all comes back to we're all struggling. And maybe I have more opportunities in certain areas than others. And you have to understand that when you go into this job, that maybe some people didn't make the same choices you made. It didn't have the same opportunities and resources that you had. So when I look, those are the 2 things I really look for. Are you a humble person? Can you serve your community? You're understanding that because of the uniform that you wear and the power that you've been given makes you no different. If anything, it makes you more accountable than the people that you serve. So when I look to hire an officer, and then when I looked for my supervisor, same thing. Are you a strong leader? Are you okay with that emotional side of this job? Are you okay with letting down that wall to make that connection? Some of the best officers in my department, that I get letters about continually. It was like I was talking to just a family member or another person. It was just that connection. I think when you boil it down to the common denominator, that's really what I look for. And historically, law enforcement, the criminal justice system, it has been discriminatory against people that live in low socioeconomic means, and I think that's why you're seeing a lot of this criminal justice reform come down the pipe. But to Chris's point, there's certain things in life, whether it's empathy, humility, love, compassion, accountability, discipline. Those are all things that are free. You can just teach people that. I mean, that's something that can be taught in any home, regardless of the circumstances. So, I mean, if we got back to those basics, and that's kind of what I look for in the people that I hire and people I promote. Do you have those qualities and that in you? Because if you do, we'll make you great cops and we'll make you great supervisors.
Mm-hmm.
Chief, outside of obvious mandatory arrest scenarios, do you encourage discretion in terms of, just as one example, I used to have this thing, if I pulled someone over for a traffic violation, you were going to get a lecture or you were going to get a ticket. You weren't going to get both. And I could typically, based on their history and based on other things, is kind of how I determined which of those I was distributing. But, do you encourage discretion? Do you encourage involvement, or do you try to limit the amount of interaction that the officers are having on various calls?
No, I absolutely encourage discretion. I mean, you've hired somebody that you've entrusted a lot of authority and a lot of freedom to as far as their day-to-day activities. So you have to give them that discretion to go out and do a very difficult job. To say, hey, we're going to make an arrest, a mandatory arrest. I mean, when you start going down that road, it's a very slippery slope to go down. So I think there's discretion at all levels in the criminal justice system, from police officers to prosecutors to public defenders to judges. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of discretion that goes in it. And for me in Ontario County, we're very fortunate in the sense that, that discretion can lead to putting people in positive situations where they can succeed. When you have things such as drug court, mental health court, veterans court, youth court, I mean, all kinds of programs and services that are offered inside the jail and outside the jail. And I always, when I look at like the systemic drug problem we have in this country, our drug investigators, they're working around the clock, it seems. But not every drug dealer is a drug dealer just to make profit. Some people in the addiction world, that they're just dealing drugs and in that environment to survive, to feed an addiction. Yep. So the answer can't always be, hey, let's lock everybody up and forget about it. Now, sometimes those people, dealing drugs at a very local level, that's the only way they're going to stop. And they get incarcerated, but that creates an opportunity. That creates an opportunity for services to be brought in or them to seek services they may not normally seek on their own if they're in a full-blown addiction. So to me, I think discretion is one of the greatest things any police officer has if it's used appropriately. And I go back to my academy days, and one of the instructors says, if you're doing the right thing for the right reason in your heart, you'll generally be okay. And I kind of that stuck with me throughout my career, and I kind of entrust my officers out there to do the same thing.
I believe in law enforcement involvement, especially in the addiction community. There's a necessity for it at certain places. I mean, in my life, the accountability measures that were there with post-release supervision and things like that were really critical. And I actually say that to Ray a lot because the whole notion of that world is that your brain isn't right anyway. I mean, for me, my problems were way beyond a bottle. The bottle just made life a lot easier to be an idiot and to behave in a way that I find disgusting now. But it took a season for me to get my mind right. And sometimes incarceration, giving the time out when Monroe County Sheriff Baxter was on here, said the same thing. There's times when you just need that time out. You can't arrest it away. But I am finding it is interesting in our community. And I think, I don't know, maybe it's just a perception, but I feel like, and we did talk about this a little, is, other communities you go into and you hear about the big street gangs or stuff like that. Our community, a lot of the crime's happening in the homes. I mean, the work I do in the emergency department, I see a lot of criminal activity that happened in somebody's home in the quiet of the afternoon during a football game. You guys have a unique, I think, environment to split that out. How do you go home when you just were doing police work in somebody's home that might be a neighbor?
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, like I said, in a community our size, I mean, you could, show up to work, and next thing you know, you're dealing with somebody that you went to high school with, or that you live next door to. It's a tough dynamic in a city our size. You don't see like for the drug problem. I mean, in some larger cities, you could probably sit on corners and just watch drug deals happen every day, when a lot of that's happening within homes and out of the public view. So it's a tough dynamic. You have to rely on a lot of community relations. You got to make those contacts. There's a lot of community organizations, community involvement. You have to put the work in to get the results. So you have to have the public trust you. So you have to be out there. Something as simple as, a community our size, we do foot patrols every day. Just accessing the community, that's information, making contact with people so they feel comfortable coming up and talking to you about their problems, or providing information. Hey, I'm seeing this happen over here. It's about building trust, and the more trust you have, the more successful you'll be. So, that's kind of my investment when I took over in 2016. I felt like let's recommit to the community policing part of it, build that trust, and make police officers accessible to the public, to get to know we serve you. You should know who we are and what we're about. So that's kind of one of the, I think for a community our size, you have to invest in that to get the results. So
right.
Well, Chief, you said something really important there. And, when we think of stigmas or just the brokenness kind of in our culture, in the family unit throughout the country, but specifically as it relates here to the law enforcement and the rest of the community. It doesn't even have to be an offender. It could be someone that was a family member of someone. But if there was a perceived wrong by someone in the community and they have developed this kind of bitterness toward law enforcement, or maybe just someone has just tuned into this nonsense of drinking from the fire hose from the media about how awful law enforcement is. Mm-hmm. If there was one message you could convey to them, to a person that for one reason or another just kind of has a general distaste for law enforcement, what would you want them to know, or how would you want them to perhaps reframe the way that they think about law enforcement? Because at some point they may need you, or just to improve that relationship that you're talking about, to rebuild that trust. I mean, what would be something you'd want people in your community to know that might not already look at law enforcement very favorably?
Have to give us a chance. I mean, I don't think it's fair to judge anybody by their worst moment. Mm-hmm. I mean, and I think you need to, give us a chance. And I always use the analogy. I mean, we all go around we've all been to the grocery store or doctor's office, and we always have an encounter at the grocery store with the clerk, and maybe they're not that friendly today, and your lasting impression was, that person's not quite so friendly. I don't think I'm going to go back there. You go to a doctor's office, or and maybe you have the first time you see that nurse or that doctor, wasn't a great experience, or I mean, don't judge us off of one experience. Don't judge us off of something you saw happen in the media halfway across the country with a police officer. Judge us off of our sustained performance. Give us an opportunity. I think it's only fair in life that way. I think back, and as I sit here across from Chris, I think to myself, growing up as a young adult and even as a young cop, I didn't have a lot of interaction with somebody that had a substance abuse problem. I just didn't. So when I became exposed to it, and you see the ends that people in addiction will go to, and the way they will victimize the people closest to them. You have to tell yourself in your mind that that's a powerful thing they're going through to make them make those decisions. So they should not be judged in that worst moment of their life when they're in a moment of full-blown addiction. And I think for law enforcement, we're on the other side of that. Like, when we're not at our best, we can't be judged. So give us an opportunity. You may have a bad experience with an officer, and then 2 weeks later, for some reason, you have contact with somebody in law enforcement, and it was like, man, that was one of the nicest officers I've ever met. Once you realize we're just humans, tasked with doing a very difficult job. I think that's the message I always put out there. Just be patient, give us an opportunity, and if something happens that puts us in a bad light, just wait for the facts to come out before we rush to judgment.
Yeah, I think that idea of a body of work. I mean, today, literally, there will be millions of law enforcement interactions today alone, millions. And I think just in this country, and I think that speaks volumes to, this body of work where they're out there serving and really trying to make a difference. And like you said, absolutely, there is a time and a place to address injustice or mistreatment. But it is such a small fraction of what really happens every day. It's like the people that teach customer service. If you go into a McDonald's and you order your Big Mac and you get your Big Mac, you leave. You don't run and tell 10 people about how awesome your McDonald's experience was because you're just so used to it. But I tell you what, you go in there and they serve you a fillet of fish instead of a Big Mac, you're going to go tell 10 people how bad the service was at McDonald's.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brian definitely will.
I will. And so, but it's that same idea of, I don't think the police need to be out giving free turkeys away for Thanksgiving just to repair this damaged image, because it really isn't. It's a perception. We can work on a perception, but that's just by continuing to do the good things that we've done, eliminate and change with the culture, eliminate some of the bad things that we've done, and move forward. And I love that you make that simple plea. Hey, just give us a chance, because we are out here doing a tough job. We want to do it with you, and we're certainly doing it for you.
Absolutely. And like you said, and the millions, today alone, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of police contact. The community will come in contact with law enforcement thousands and thousands of times across today alone. When you boil it down, and everybody will walk away feeling good about it, but it's at less than 0.5% time when the community and the police come together, where maybe the outcome isn't so great. There's a use of force. The numbers don't lie. You're right. Day in and day out, the community interact with the police in a lot of different fashions and under a lot of different circumstances, without any issues. And so, we have to, like I said, I think it's always good to pump the brakes a little bit, step back and say, okay, before we overreact to something, let's get all the facts and see where that takes us.
Well, Brian, we're kind of at that point now where we wrap up the show. Chief Hedworth, is there anything else you'd like to close on in terms of shout-outs?
Just a couple things. For the veterans out there, my heart goes out for the thanks, the sacrifice that you make for all of us. It's not lost. We're able to sit here and talk today freely. Maybe we have the same opinions, maybe we have different opinions, but it all because of the sacrifices other people are making for us. And when you look across the world, that's not always the case, that people don't have that type of freedom. So I think it's important that we make the veterans a number one priority every day. I have 5 of them that work in my building. One's actively deployed right now in Afghanistan, so we're praying for his safe return. My beard, just so for the record, we have a shave policy for the city of Canandaigua. No beards, but the 2 unions within my building came to me and said, "Hey, Chief, for No Shave November, we'd like to make a donation to the Roswell Park Comprehensive Cancer Center for young adults and children.
Nice.
And if we do that, would you waive the shave policy?" He says, if it's a substantial donation, for sure. So when you see the Canandaigua police officers driving around, and they're going to look pretty scruffy, but including myself, I don't generally grow a beard, but I did to help support the cause. So it's a great cause. I can't think of anybody's life that hasn't been touched by cancer. My mom was taken in 2005. I'm a cancer survivor since 2010. So, we're looking to step up, and that's just one of those things where I encourage everybody to go to our Facebook page to see all the great things we're doing. We generally just put all the positive stuff on there, activities we're involved in, programs that we're doing. So take a look at our Facebook page. I'd also like to give a shout out to Donna Shartle. Donna Shartle's she's an employee at the Canandaigua School District. Her life was touched in a very special way by members of law enforcement years ago through a tragedy, and since then she's been committed to supporting law enforcement. So she has a group. It's called Back the Blue organization. Maybe you're familiar with it.
I'm familiar.
Yeah, she's the driving force.
You actually introduced me to them.
Yes. So go to their website, oc-pba.org. They got a lot of gear on there you can buy. All those funds go to that are raised support things like Do the Right Thing program, which she helped bring back a couple of years ago. Shop with a Cop, Coffee with a Cop. We're participating in the Marines Toys for Tots. She has a youth academy she puts on in the summertime. She'll reach out to any member of law enforcement wherever you are if you're, somebody's involved in a tragedy or having a difficult time. So she's a tremendous resource. I encourage you to visit and check out the website.
We'll definitely support that. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so Chief, it was an honor to talk to you, and I appreciate your service in the community. The time that I spent in Canandaigua was really positive, and you do a job that's very difficult, and to have an entire department on your shoulders makes it that much more stressful for you personally, and so I appreciate you carrying that load. And as I wrap up, we mention on this show a lot learning to appreciate people, and today what we tried to do again was, recognize that stigma affects everyone in some way, and the idea of breaking through barriers and getting to the other side allows us for better interactions, better communication, and it can be within your family, it can be with a police officer, it can be with someone that's just different from you. Mm-hmm. And that's something that we've tried to do over and over, is to speak that truth. And this mantra that I close with every time comes from learning to appreciate people. And very soon, I'm going to be introducing Alex, the originator of learning to appreciate people. And he and I did a bunch of work together that we really want to roll out, because we feel that it will help people. There are some tools and principles that go back to some very, common communication philosophies, and have been very beneficial to a lot of people. So stay tuned for that coming out. But I do want to remind everybody that one way you can help yourself, making life easier for yourself and dealing with people that, you might not have a lot in common with, is just remembering that I'm not perfect. Nobody is. I have value. Everybody does.
Mm-hmm. And Chief Hedworth, I really appreciate you coming on here. Canandaigua is my home. It's my community, and I love it there. And the work you guys are doing is outstanding. I see all sides of it, being involved in the addiction recovery community now. But I do believe that the policing and the accountability was very important to save my life, and I am grateful for that. But I appreciate the audience for tuning into 100 Proof Living, where we believe that changed lives change lives.